did get my one money, but I had a massive brain fart and accidentally spent it all. Most of it went to expensive pizza orders.
Radio Free Innsmouth episode 362. Getting back to a continuation of the 360 No Scope episode about Kraftwerk, a band who may not be your favorite band, but are, in all likelihood, your favorite band's favorite band.
Where have you been? We are the robots.
Last time we talked about these guys, we went over their evolution out of the krautrock scene of weird, improvisational, experimental, musique concrète meanderings, and into the realm of deceptively minimalist, highly composed techno-pop.
Music non-stop, techno-pop.
That through its blend of the classical and ancient with the most modern of sounds ended up influencing all kinds of dance music, rap, weird experimental music, and a surprising amount of death metal and black metal acts. This time around, we'll be looking at what I consider to be the peak of Kraftwerk, my personal favorite era of Kraftwerk, that being in the late 70s when they're essentially a four-piece. Ralf Hutter, Florian Schneider, Karl Bartos, and Wolfgang Flür. Specifically, we're talking about two albums that I hold incredibly close to my heart. Trans-Europe Express and The Man Machine.
야, 나를 완전 제대로 잡아.
Yeah, I hear you. You're looking at that episode runtime and you're like, how can this guy spend that much time talking about two albums? Just two CDs. Well, let me tell you something, sister. I've been listening to these two particular albums for the majority of my life at this point, and they've both got a remarkable amount of musical meat to them. So I've got a lot to say about them.
Do you know any rousing Christmas carols?
Yes, here's one of my favorites. We wish you a Christmas. We wish you a Christmas and a New Year.
First up, Trans-Europe Express, 1977. Same year as the first Star Wars movie, and still widely noted to be one of the most influential releases of all time to this day, in any genre. It kind of picks up where Autobahn left off, being something of a concept album about a mode of transportation, in this case.
Great fucking trains!
But it mixes that sort of wandering, adventurous, programmatic music with the sort of machine-age philosophical melancholia that really reared its head on the Radioactivity album. And depending on which day of the week you ask me, this might actually be my favorite Kraftwerk album. It starts out with a very positive sounding sequencer melody, to which they add sort of a rolling, rollicking bass line, again very reminiscent of the sort of stuff they would do on Autobahn. But the rhythm this time around, for lack of a better term, is more train-like and less car-like. It feels a little more passive with these fragments of melody drifting by like you're looking at them out a window instead of driving through them in a car. Then the vocals kick in. And we've got this echoing, dramatic paean to the soul of Europe, which is accompanied by the same sort of orchestron choirs that they really started experimenting with on the Radioactivity album, but this time they're a lot less dark sounding, befitting the very positive vibe of this song. It's still self-consciously mechanical, but it's not soulless in any way, shape, or form. And it puts forth this echoing, eternal, cosmic sort of feeling that, for me, actually holds some similarity to stuff like Burzum and even some Branacald, just in a different genre of music with a slightly sunnier atmosphere. Now, this album does get heavier, particularly towards the second half, when you really get into the Trans-Europe Express conceptual suite in a more dogmatic fashion, which uses as its principal backbone a very minor key, but not necessarily sad or happy, sort of repeated melodic motif, to which is added much heavier percussive elements. And then in the background, you also have this looping percussive electronic figure to mimic the feeling of actually rollicking over the rails. The vocal performance on this one, in comparison to Europe Endless, is much more heavily vocoded and intentionally synthetic and cold sounding. You also have the introduction of their second major melodic motif in this song. Again, minor key, but not necessarily sad or happy. It just kind of exists. And then, like Autobahn, you have the transition sections. Instead of the simulation of a car gear shifting, it's the Doppler effect of a train going by. And we're actually into a separate song entitled Metal on Metal that is seamlessly blended with the initial Trans-Europe Express. I kind of see it as all one major song because they fade into each other so smoothly. This part's just more characterized by its emphasis on onomatopoetic sound effects, the usage of different percussion sounds to much more clearly imitate the noises of a train. But even then, as as it goes on, those percussive sounds crystallize into this one sort of beeping melodic noise that eventually brings back that vocal hook from earlier. It's sort of an idea of creating art out of what might not necessarily be seen as conventionally artistic materials, twisting and tuning your percussion until it comes back around and becomes a melodic instrument again. And this reaches its apex on the follow-up song to Metal on Metal, entitled Franz Schubert, which in a way is still part of a larger Trans-Europe Express overall suite because it's based on those same two melodic motifs, but it takes them in an entirely new direction. In this case, the percussive element is entirely abandoned in favor of this flowing melody. But if you really pay attention to the melodies being played, you realize they're just a major key variant of the two main melodic motifs from Trans-Europe Express, given a much more liquid and malleable form, allowing these melodies to spin off into a lot of looping scale runs over the very dogmatic sequencer loop. The melodies kind of loop around and wander and fade into each other in a way that was very influential to bands like Burzum, in addition to the more obvious electronic acts that took influence. And at the end of the album, we get another little mini song that blends into the song prior. In this case, it's a repetition of the concept of endlessness that started the album out with Europe Endless. That's the main conceptual Trans-Europe Express experience in a nutshell. And it was very influential in a whole lot of different musical acts over the course of the 20th century. In particular, Joy Division used to use side B of Trans-Europe Express as their intro music for most of their concerts, or they'd listen to it beforehand in order to snatch that same kind of feeling they were trying to put forward with their own music. But that's not all that's going on Trans-Europe Express. You've also got a couple other songs that exist as standalone products and have more in common with Radioactivity and less with Autobahn. My favorite of these is entitled The Hall of Mirrors, and it was actually the first Kraftwerk song I ever heard. It immediately grabbed my attention after I decided to give this band a try because good old Varg.
So, how do you like your cornflakes? You know, do you like them crispy or do you like them soft?
Said they were cool. This one's a bit more immediately emotionally arresting than Trans-Europe Express, in that it's a lot more intensely dark than Trans-Europe Express, with that cavernous, echoed, simplistic percussion, and a much more skeletal sense of melody, and that weird twinkling sequencer loop in the background. When the vocals kick in, you can tell the lyrics are quite a bit darker this time around as well.
The young man stepped into the Hall of Mirrors.
The song being sort of an ode to Narcissus and egotism, which is in conflict with existential angst.
Even the greatest stars,
the distortion of reality,
discover themselves in the looking glass.
It's very potent on this song. Again, it just feels very dark and almost despondent to me in a way, particularly as the melodies start to really unfold and wrap around each other in these very gnarled forms.
Wait till I get pounded up on your lap. That's crazy.
I don't hear people bring this one up as often as some of the other major Kraftwerk singles, but for me, this is absolutely one of their best songs and certainly one of their most gothic in affectation. And appropriately enough, highly influential goth rock band Susie and the Banshees actually covered this song on their 1986 album Through the Looking Glass in very interesting fashion. This one uses perhaps more conventional rock music instrumentation, but it's done so in a similarly minimalistic soundscapey way as the Kraftwerk song was. The protagonist is changed to a female, which is appropriate enough given that it's a broad singing the song this time around. But other than that, the lyrics are unchanged. Musically, however, it's almost hard to recognize as a cover if you're not really familiar with the Kraftwerk song, at least until they get to the chorus section, where the melodic structures from the original song, which had previously been obscured, become a lot more obvious. I mean, the original Hall of Mirrors was so minimalist that it provides a really good skeleton for other artists to expand upon, and obviously Susie and crew took advantage of that, providing one of the greatest examples of a band not necessarily of the same genre as Kraftwerk, taking a whole lot of influence from the sort of atmospheres that group was putting forth and recontextualizing them in a new way. Really cool cover. And speaking of really cool covers, the follow-up album to Trans-Europe Express, The Man Machine, again, depending on which day of the week you're asking me, this might be my favorite Kraftwerk album. It's perhaps their most striking work, certainly their most modern sounding album of the 70s, 70s, at least in terms of audio fidelity. I actually talked quite a bit about my two favorite songs on the Man Machine almost 6 years ago on episode 66 about Perturbator. Those being Space Lab, which incidentally, according to good old
Look, big sunglasses, not emperor sunglasses, big.
Fenriz himself, was going to be the title of his third abandoned and unreleased Neptune Towers album, and Metropolis. Both of these songs are interesting in that they manage to wrest a whole lot of different emotional shades from what would normally be seen as soulless equipment compared to standard instrumentation, you know, all these bleepy bloopy machines. Space Lab starts out initially as the happier sounding of the two. It leads in with an appropriately cosmic and outer space sounding, ascending series of notes that really do feel like you're taking off into space, particularly as the sequencer starts to speed up and it threatens to all become a little bit too chaotic until a more calming series of drone notes starts to extract the main melodic motif of this particular song. A bright phoenix arising out of the ash of electronic chaos as we ascend to the stars. I would say that this song represents an examination of the idea of a space-faring civilization reaching a sort of utopia. It's certainly very driving, particularly in its usage of the motoric beat, which is the drum beat you're hearing right now, initially developed by Neu, the other band besides Kraftwerk that formed out of the ashes of the original band organization. But then something interesting happens. The melodies don't quite get sad or angry, but they do darken a bit. They sound kind of wistful, melancholic, compared to what came prior to them in the song, representing the endless vastness of outer space and all the emotions that sort of thing conjures. Then the only vocals of the song kick in, and they bring us back to the happier feeling that we had from earlier in the song. And the rest of the song is essentially them vacillating between those happier vocal-led sections and the more melancholic outer spacey ones. Super cool song, but if that represents something of a future utopia, Metropolis, the follow-up track, very similar, but way more obviously dystopian. Like Space Lab, it starts out with a very lengthy sort of opening up section, introducing these different ascending tones, kind of blending into each other. But in this case, it's less of the bright phoenix rising out of technological chaos and more of a very dark machine turning itself on, expelling negative emotions like exhaust to get into the central pulse of the composition, which emerges from that sort of cosmic droning. This one's a very beat-heavy song, as you can hear when the percussion kicks in. So it's very driving in a way, but again, it feels a lot darker and almost frightening at times. Interestingly enough, the vocals this time around, unlike Space Lab, are not electronically treated at all. Perhaps this more human-sounding vocal performance is supposed to represent biological humanity coming into existential conflict with the ever-growing machine. And as you're hearing right now, the looping, expansive contrapuntal melodies, far from the slightly wistful feeling of similar sections on Space Lab, are much more dark and somewhat malevolent. At the very least, they're rather threatening sounding, and it is for this reason that Metropolis would become particularly influential on a lot of black metal artists. And if you don't believe me, there's an Arcturus song that essentially wholesale appropriates the structure of Metropolis. This song, entitled Cosmo Jam, was recorded during the same session as their debut full-length Asperahium Symphonia, one of the first black metal albums I ever heard, and still to this day one of my personal favorite examples of symphonic black metal. Like Space Lab and Metropolis, this one starts out with a gradual and lengthy opening up section of different electronic tones, before then introducing the percussive element. In this case, not a drum machine, but rather Hellhammer from Mayhem doing his best to play the drums as if he were some sort of automaton. The way the icy keyboard melodies kind of skitter across the basal drones and dogmatic percussion is so similar to the kind of stuff Kraftwerk was doing on the Space Lab and Metropolis songs that, honestly, I'll eat my hat if Kraftwerk wasn't the direct inspiration for this track in particular. Joke's on you, I don't actually wear hats. My head's too big. But the point still stands. If you wanted a direct example of Kraftwerk inspiring Nordic black metal, there you go. Perhaps the most famous song on this album, at least in a commercial pop-oriented sense, exists at its exact midpoint, that being the fourth song, The Model. which is a very interesting attestation to the sort of existential angst Kraftwerk were able to put forth in the pop song format. This song might be the closest Kraftwerk had gotten to a love song at this point, but rather than standard romantic sort of lyrics, it's a wistful sort of love from afar type situation, with the narrator of the song detailing his admiration for the female figure from the point of view of almost a voyeur, but not in a particularly sexual way. Instead, the song's subject is almost seen as more of an art piece. I almost find a bit of an overlap with a lot of the idol culture going on in Asia years later. Also, this counterpoint section. One of the coolest bits of melody Kraftwerk ever wrote, and unsurprisingly this song also served as a major inspiration for a lot of artists existing both inside and outside the electronic music realm. In this case, we're going to be talking about Big Black.
Got your ass.
The classic avant-garde noise rock band from the Midwest, with their classic sophomore effort, the delightfully titled Songs About Fucking. You almost wouldn't think a delicate little creature like The Model could exist on such an overtly transgressive album, but Steve Albini and gang managed to make it work pretty well. Again, like with the Susie and the Banshees Kraftwerk cover, they use more conventional rock instrumentation, but in this case, the melodic skeleton of the song is a lot more obvious than the fleeting glimpses of it we got with Hall of Mirrors. The very bright, yet simultaneously incredible harsh guitar tone actually brings to mind another krautrock band, that being Can, on their first album, Monster Movie from 1969, particularly on the song Mary Mary So Contrary. Maybe someday if I want to get even less viewers than these Kraftwerk episodes are getting, I'll do an episode on Can for you guys. Anyways, the particular way Big Black decides to hit that counterpoint section I pointed out earlier, holy shit. Like, damn, dude, that's fucking intense. It's awesome. It sounds like early Cocteau Twins being run through a meat grinder. Nasty shit. Getting back to the Kraftwerk album at hand, the opening and particularly closing tracks of this album lean very hard into that icy, percussive sort of sound that Kraftwerk had been building towards on the past couple albums. Like, the title track of the album, that one starts out with just an electronic drum beat, real simple stuff. Then they bring in that initial sort of melody, you know, nice catchy stuff. But then that beat hits you. And it's like, damn, dude, did these Germans in the 1970s, these nerds, just invent rap? I mean, this song just hits like a truck. Possibly the heaviest Kraftwerk has ever sounded. And I really dig the vocoded vocals, particularly when this happens. Closest thing this song's got to a proper chorus is just this ascending fugue of glorious robotic vocals. And then the second half of the song, man, pretty much hits the Kraftwerk version of a breakdown. I mean, you gotta dig that. They even included fucking goofy sound effects. Bleepity bloopity brrr. I mean, if I was in charge, I probably would have thrown in more sound effects. You know, maybe some of those. Or a bit of that. Maybe even some. Yeah, I'm just fucking around. All I'm saying is I respect the funny sound effect hustle. And I respect the fuck out of this song and every other song on the Man Machine. Because it's an awesome fucking album, and Kraftwerk is an awesome fucking group of musicians. And if you're more of a Computer World or Tour de France guy, don't fret, because we're going to be hitting those up in Kraftwerk Part 3 coming at you real soon. Until then, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I'll see you next time.
Look at me, I look like a fucking retarded, deformed asshole.